In the early 1800s, Red Clay Park in the hills of eastern Tennessee was the seat of the Cherokee government. The great council spring that the Cherokee used for their water supply was located there. At a council meeting, they learned that they were to lose their mountains, streams, and valleys forever. Principal Chief of the Cherokee, John Ross, sent a petition to the government asking them to change the relocation policy. He wrote, "We are deprived of membership in the human family. We have neither land nor home nor resting place that can be called our own. We are overwhelmed." This petition did not move the government to abandon the relocation policy. This is the story of the arduous journey of the Reverend Jesse Bushyhead, an ordained Baptist minister and proud Cherokee. He lived in the Telecone Plains area of East Tennessee with his wife Eliza, who was with child, when they were told about the government plan to relocate them to Oklahoma. They were against the plan and did not believe that it would happen. However, in 1838, soldiers appeared at their home and told them that they had to leave, taking only what they could carry. They complained bitterly, but it was to no avail. While being led away, they saw the white settlers taking the possessions they had left behind. They were taken to Fort Cass on the Hiwassee River and placed in stockades. As the deadline approached when General Winfield Scott in the U.S. Army was to escort them to their new homeland, Reverend Bushyhead volunteered to lead the 3rd Detachment of 950 Cherokees, where there was no capable leader among them. He was one of 13 detachments under the leadership of Cherokee Chief John Ross. A soldier, Private John G. Burnett, accompanying the Chief John Ross detachment, wrote, "One can never forget the sadness and solemnity of that morning. Chief John Ross led in prayer, and when the bugle sounded and the wagon started rolling, many of the children rose to their feet and waved their little hands goodbye to their mountain homes, knowing they were leaving them forever. Many of these helpless people did not have blankets, and many of them had been driven from home barefooted." Detachment leader George Hicks lamented, "We are now about to take our final leave and kind farewell to our native land, the country that the Great Spirit gave our fathers." Reverend Bushyhead's detachment left on the forced journey of 800 miles to Oklahoma on September 3, 1838, just 2 days after the Elijah Hicks detachment. He decided to take a northern route. He warned his detachment that they would not be allowed to travel on any Sunday, as the Lord had designated that as a day of rest. They arrived at the Shellsford Baptist Church on October the 26th, where they were allowed to camp and care for their sick. The animals and people were fatigued from passing so rapidly over a bad road. He preached to his people and to members of the community. They held a council there that resulted in them sending a message to Cherokee Chief John Ross, requesting that claims for losses be delayed until every Cherokee with a claim could be present or represented. They had their corn ground at the grist mill, located nearby on the Collins River. They held a service for the Cherokees who died there. They were buried in the nearby cemetery in unmarked graves. Chief Whitepath, a member of the Elijah Hicks detachment, became ill, but he wanted to continue on. The Mallory Way Station, located in Port Royal, housed a tavern and stagecoach inn. They bought meal and fodder from the Port Royal mills and other goods from the local merchants. They stayed there to rest before moving on. Chief Whitepath, though ill, continued on until he reached the Stagecoach Inn at Guthrie, Kentucky. The water from the inn's well seemed to revive him, and he called it the Well of Sweet Water. While in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Chief Whitepath died, along with another Cherokee, Fly Smith, who was traveling with the Old Field Detachment. Stephen Foreman, a minister with that detachment, and Reverend Bushyhead preached the funeral service for them. From Hopkinsville, Kentucky, they headed northwest toward the Big Spring at Princeton, Kentucky. Before arriving there, Reverend Bushyhead's older half-brother Isaac became ill. Reverend Bushyhead wanted to stay with him, but he had to keep his detachment moving as the weather was getting colder every day, and they still had a long way to go before reaching Oklahoma. He had to leave Isaac there to recuperate. Isaac was joined by his father-in-law and his half-sister Susan. Reverend Bushyhead's detachment arrived at the Big Spring near Princeton, Kentucky, where they camped and took on fresh water. While at Big Spring, Reverend Bushyhead heard that Reverend Daniel Buttrick had stopped where Isaac and his family were camped. He had spent the night with them conversing about religious subjects. Before leaving, he had prayer with them. The weather turned bitterly cold after they left the Big Spring and headed toward Berry's Ferry to cross the Ohio River. Finally, a break in the weather allowed them to board the ferry to cross the Ohio River. They were charged $1 each, which was about 8 times the going rate. When the ferry arrived at Golconda in Illinois, a man named Willard charged them a toll to use a road he had constructed specifically to cash in on them. The days and weeks they spent in crossing Illinois were the most brutal for them. Many landowners would not allow them to camp on their land or cut firewood for warmth and hot food.
In peace, we've come to pray and to seek the Lord today.
They reached the village of Anna, Illinois. Reverend Buttrick said it was a pleasant little village and its moral character was better than any they had seen in Illinois. Reverend Bushyhead and his wife Eliza met Anna and Winstead Davy there. Eliza was expecting a child, and Anna Davy insisted that they stay with them. After a most pleasant stay, they extended their gratitude to the Davies for their hospitality. He led his detachment the short distance to Willard Landing on the Mississippi River, arriving in a snowstorm. Many of the Cherokee were weakened by disease, exhaustion, and depression. They needed more bedding and warm clothing. They had enough food for 2 or 3 days, but they were forced to stay there for weeks. They killed and ate some of the livestock and mules to survive. People died so fast that they had to be covered with branches instead of being properly buried. Chief John Ross, while still in Fort Cass, said that he believed they would have milder weather by traveling south through Arkansas. However, Private Burnett, a soldier with his detachment, wrote, "On the morning of November the 17th, we encountered a terrific sleet and snowstorm with freezing temperatures, and from that day until we reached the end of the fateful journey, the sufferings of the Cherokees was awful. The trail of the exiles is a trail of death. They have to sleep in the wagons and on the ground without fire, and I have known as many as 22 of them to die in one night of pneumonia due to ill treatment, cold, and exposure. Among this number was the beautiful Christian wife of Chief John Ross. This noble-hearted woman died a martyr to childhood, giving her only blanket for the protection of a sick child. She rode thinly clad through a blinding sleet and snowstorm, developed pneumonia, and died in the still hours of a bleak winter night." They camped there, and on January 3, 1839, Eliza gave birth to a daughter. She named her Eliza Missouri Bushyhead. Reverend Bushyhead's sister Nancy had been very ill on the journey. The conditions there were much too harsh for her, and she ended up dying. They buried her near the camp under a small wooden cross. On February the 23rd, 1839, his detachment arrived in Oklahoma. They settled in a place they called Breadtown because food rations were distributed there. Later, they renamed it Baptist Mission. Their first year there was one of rapid rebuilding. Reverend Bushyhead held church services in his home until the Baptist Mission Church was established, using beams brought all the way from Tennessee and Georgia. In the ensuing years, Reverend Bushyhead was elected Chief Justice of the Cherokee Nation, and he would also serve as Clerk of the Council. Reverend Jesse Bushyhead's noble work is cut short by a fever, which leads to his death on July 17, 1844. He is buried in the Baptist Mission Cemetery, where a monument to him is erected. An epitaph on the monument reads, "Reverend Jesse Bushyhead was a man noble in person and noble in heart. His choice was to be a true and faithful minister of his Lord and Master rather than any high and worldly position. He loved his country and people, serving them from time to time in many important offices and missions. He united with the Baptist Church in his early manhood and died as he had lived, a devoted Christian.